Yesterday, I had been invited to someone for breakfast. Someone in Hermanus, so it's important that you know that that does happen and that I allow it to happen. Because shockingly few of you have been inviting me to meals over the last 11 months, but you're probably waiting for the novelty to work off, so I understand. Perhaps in the new year I will be inundated with all sorts of invitations to meals, as I said, with which I'm quite okay. But anyway, yesterday I went for breakfast and this person clearly wanted to do something very special, so it started off with some strawberries and yogurt. Strawberries that had been bought all the way at Swimmerbosch on the R44, which is of course one of the famous strawberry farms in that area. And then after the first course, the second of two, the second course arrived, and guess what it was? No, not the predictable eggs and bacon and tomato, no, there would be none of that. It was a lovely, now how does one say this, croissant, with scrambled eggs and salmon. Oh, as it was brought from the kitchen, my mouth immediately started watering, and I finished every crumb on my plate. I also took away as a takeaway some scrambled eggs. You know what? I had finished the salmon, so I couldn't take that away. But I did take the scrambled egg. You know, I'm a bachelor, so I must take my chances where I can get them. My mom always says, "You kan ek weet jy sal water ook brand." So laat ander mense maar die kook werk. It was a lovely morning with some lovely company and lovely fellowship, not to mention lovely food. But let me tell you, the host unfortunately made a mistake by leaving the TV on. And as we sat there with me gobbling down my croissant with scrambled eggs and salmon with some lychee juice, an eye of mine did fall on the TV, which really sadly was on the channel of the BBC. So I became very aware of all that transpired in London yesterday. I wanted to, at first, see what was happening because it's normally such a moving ceremony, the ceremony of remembrance at the cenotaph. That, of course, was postponed because there was a pro-Palestinian march which included 50,000 protesters. Also, at the same time, every now and then, the reporter would have flashes of Ilian Andam's funeral, a 15-year-old who had been stabbed to death in Croydon. I left the breakfast replete, but sad. I couldn't believe that this is the condition of the world, even as we get ready for Advent. I suppose every time I have salmon, I will probably now think of this quite good-looking reporter on BBC, short hair, red poppy on her black blouse, sharing this earth-shattering news. I found it quite strange because my sermon had already been prepared for today, and my sermon was going to be based on Isaiah 9, verses 6 to 7, where we have that powerful, that profound prophecy of the Messiah who would come and what he would be called. For even there in Isaiah chapter 9, 740 years before Jesus' arrival, we have it foretold that one day he would appear and that he would bear all these fancy names, like Wonderful Counselor, like Mighty God, like Everlasting Father, and then of course my personal favorite, the Prince of Peace. I was going to talk to you about what that means as a title for Jesus, the Prince of Peace, the one who would bring an end to violence and cruelty from the North Pole to the South Pole. And if Psalm 72 is anything to go by, there it is also predicted that Jesus would have this reign over his kingdom of peace and justice from where the sun rises to where it sets. We have other prophecies like the one in Micah 4, which says that there's going to come a day where the Son of Righteousness rises with healing in its wings. A very clear prophecy of Jesus and what he would be all about. I wasn't sure if I could go ahead with the Prince of Peace stuff today. Perhaps not, because look at the world. I wasn't at peace changing my sermon late last night. I can't say that there was a calm, a serene feel in my heart, because what I had seen on BBC in the morning was still haunting me. So today I'm not going to advocate world peace, and I'm not going to promote a political agenda. I want to rather talk about the Prince of Peace, who brings serenity to our hearts. For maybe more than anything, that's what I need. You see, Isaiah in the Old Testament probably meant Jesus, when he called Jesus the Prince of Peace that would come, he probably meant it in some kind of political atmosphere. He probably meant for a Messiah to come and free his people from whatever, bringing deliverance, righteousness, according to Zechariah. But what if there's another slant to consider? What if there's another interpretation, not about Jesus being this global Prince of Peace, but what if he is to be the one who brings peace to our little confused worlds inside as well? There's enough in his ministry to prove all of that. In Matthew chapter 8, we have the first hint of how important peace is to Jesus. For in Matthew chapter 8, as he finds himself in a boat with his disciples, with a storm raging all around, he uses a very peculiar and very particular phrase to calm the storm. We all know the story of Jesus in the boat. In fact, it looks like Jesus was catching 40 winks below deck while all of this was happening. The disciples, absolutely paranoid and panic-stricken, went to wake Jesus up saying, "We have a crisis, come and do something." And what is the wording that Jesus uses to calm the storm? Not shut up now, not calm down, but peace, comma, be still. Could that be the first instance where we have this glimpse of how important Jesus sees peace? And how vital it is for us to have him around to calm the storms that rage deep within. Jesus could have used all sorts of other phrasing to get rid of that storm. Like, "Get out!" But he chooses a very special phrase saying, "Peace, be still." The next kind of way in which we see Jesus living up to this Prince of Peace business is, of course, him entering into the city of Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. That had been foretold also by Zechariah 9. Look, Zechariah says, "Look, your king comes to you, Jerusalem. Your king comes to you on the back of a donkey." In order to understand the significance of that, one has to put it in context. Because in the ancient Near East, kings would not ride on donkeys. It would be embarrassing for them to do that. A king would either come on a horse, symbolizing power and military strength, or he would, as a noble, be carried on some kind of cart or carriage on the shoulders of his slaves or servants. But Jesus, again, being very weird, chooses intentionally the donkey. For in the ancient Near East, the donkey symbolized peace. Whenever somebody arrived in a city, somebody of influence, somebody who had some kind of position, some kind of authority, whenever they would arrive on the back of a donkey, it would be clear to all that he came in peace. So Jesus chooses his mode of transport very carefully and very deliberately. Let's jump to John chapter 14. I see you need this to go a bit faster, né? So let's jump to the next scripture. John 14, verse 27. Now, once again, that verse can only make sense when we put it into context. Jesus is finding himself in John chapter 14 in a space where he needs to prepare his disciples for the crucifixion. It's the chapter after the washing of the feet, so it's that whole dramatic week of the entry into Jerusalem, of Jesus having been anointed at Bethany, of the fig tree being cursed by Jesus, the cleansing of the temple, etc., etc. There was a lot happening building up to that Friday of Jesus' crucifixion, and it looks like chapters 14, 15, and 16 of John's Gospel are the teachings of Jesus during that week as he got his disciples ready for his death. So Jesus says this at a very specific time. We all know how that chapter starts. It starts with Jesus wanting to comfort his disciples by saying, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." In Eugene Peterson's The Message, it's translated as, "Do not let this throw you." So do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in me. Trust also in God. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. And then Jesus goes on teaching them, preaching to them, giving them examples of the kingdom of God. And when he gets to verse 27, he says this, "Guys, before I forget, it is absolutely crucial that you hear this. My peace I give unto you, not as the world gives." I often wonder what that little bit means. Not as the world gives. So it looks like there are two different kinds of peace up for grabs. The one that Christ provides, and then the one the world foolishly offers. It looks like the disciples didn't have much time. They needed to decide right then and there, based on Jesus' words, what they would go for. Either the peace of Christ or the peace of the world. Just a bit further on in chapter 14 of John's Gospel, Jesus talks about how the prince of the world would come. Which really fascinated me because Jesus, of course, is the Prince of Peace. And here he refers to the Prince of the world. It looks like as Jesus offers his disciples the peace that only he can give, he was also getting them ready for what lay ahead, even as the Prince of the world was preparing to come. In John chapter 16, so I'm still in that space where Jesus is preparing his disciples for his execution. Remember I said John chapter 14, John chapter 15, and John chapter 16 all seem to have that one aim, where Jesus is teaching his disciples before Good Friday. Now, 2 chapters on, in John chapter 16, Jesus says, I have told you these things so that you can have peace in me. Take heart and be of good cheer. Don't know if any of the 12 of the disciples were in any kind of mood for good cheer, but anyway, there it was. Be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. What does Jesus mean when he says, I have told you all of this so that you can have peace in me? In order to understand that, one has to rewind back to John chapter 15 and back to John chapter 14. And then put it all together. Jesus says, I have told you A, B, C, D, and E, so that the result of my teachings can lead to you having peace. And then once peace is yours, the good cheer won't be far away either. This theme of Jesus wanting peace for his disciples' weary and wary hearts continues as the Gospel of John unfolds. For in John chapter 20, Jesus meets up with his disciples again post-resurrection. So we've had John chapter 14 where Jesus says, my peace I give unto you. We've had John chapter 16 where Jesus says, I have told you all of this stuff. You better remember it because it's going to make sure that you have peace in your heart. And now in John 20, the desire of Jesus is still abundantly clear for his disciples to have what? Inner peace. So Jesus, upon meeting them, it looks like, again, in the upper room behind locked doors this time, out of fear of the Jew, it says there, né? Which looks like it could be a misprint. The original could have said, out of fear of Judas, actually. But anyway, that's just by the way. So it says there that on the evening of the resurrection, Jesus had jumped out of the grave in the morning. By that evening, it looks like the disciples had missed the message, so they were huddling together for safety in the upper room, not quite knowing what the future would hold, doubtful and uncertain. Jesus comes to them, however, in his resurrection power, in his risen presence. And what do you think the first word is that Jesus speaks to his disciples, and dare I say, over them? Shalom, for which the best English word is peace. I think I preached after Easter this year to you and said that shalom doesn't only mean peace. Shalom probably means may everything be well in your life. But because we want to save space in our English Bibles, we just put in there peace. But that is the kind of peace that God longs for each of us. A shalom, a place in our lives where everything is okay. Where it is well with your soul. And I have every reason to believe that Jesus stands in this congregation this morning. And he breathes that promise over us again. Shalom. Peace to you. Paul takes it to another level in his letter to the Philippians, chapter 4. Remember, Philippians has gone down in history as the letter of joy. It's particularly poignant because it was written from a Roman dungeon. So trust me, if I ever ended up in those days in a Roman dungeon, I wouldn't be joyful. I would be many things, but not joyful. Paul, however, sits there with all sorts of fetters attached to his ankles, getting very little food, probably being on the receiving end of the Roman soldiers or Roman guards' brutality. And yet he manages to, by candlelight, put together this unforgettable letter, the one to the Philippians. And Paul says they rejoice in the Lord, and just for good measure, I will say it again, rejoice. And then three verses later he says, and may the peace of God, wait for it, may the peace of God which surpasses all human understanding guard your hearts and your minds. I didn't think it possible, but it clearly is. Paul was speaking from a point of experience. He sat there in chains and was still feeling deep inside of him the peace of Christ setting in. The peace that surpasses even human understanding. Isn't that the peace that you pray for? Isn't that the peace that you want more than anything else this Christmas? To be able to sleep sweetly instead of tossing and turning and allowing your worries to get the better of you. Don't you want to reach that stage in your walk with Jesus where you let go and let Him? I wasn't at peace last night when I tweaked my sermon. By tweaking, I mean rewrite it altogether. I wasn't at peace, but then the thought hit me, I'm often not at peace when I write my sermons. Simply because I'm constantly worrying about you. I might as well confess it. God has inserted in me a very pastoral heart. It is what it is. I've tried over the years to escape it, but I can't. Over 19 years of ministry, I've always worried deeply about my people. That's just how I am. Every time I grab my pen to start writing a sermon, or every time I switch on my laptop to put a sermon together, you are heavy on my mind. And you know why? Because I think long and hard about sermons that would bring you peace. Because just as I have over the years yearned for the peace that only Jesus can supply, so I have longed for it for everyone in my spiritual care as well. What I'm trying to say is this: you are often to blame for my sleepless nights. Don't you want peace this festive season? Don't you want peace in whatever you are facing, in whatever you are going through? And you know what? I don't know all of your situations intimately, but I know enough about people, and I know enough about ministry, and I know enough of you because several of you have come to my office looking for care, looking for help, looking for support. So I know that there is a good percentage of us not having peace right now. That inside of you it is churning. It's like a storm raging. And you know what I want for this Christmas to be a time where you hear very clearly those words: peace, be still. I don't want you to every day and every night, and I definitely don't want it for you when you come to church. I don't want you to sit here with a shivering heart, frightened and trembling. I want you to release whatever fear you have, whatever is dragging you down, whatever is stealing your joy, whatever is ruining your life. I want you to release it into the hands of Jesus. As I stand here, I can't think of anything that I would want more. Maybe a croissant with some salmon, but that would just be an added bonus. If you ask me today what I want more than anything else in the world, it would be for all of us, pastor and people, to have the peace of Christ. Now, I better be clear as I end. I'm not saying that peace means a problemless life, because it probably doesn't. The peace I'm talking about is an okayness even in your unfavorable circumstances. Knowing that somehow God is going to maneuver things for things to be okay for you. It is not allowing your heart to be troubled, but to trust God. To not let your situation throw you, but to have faith in the God who is utterly and indescribably faithful. Knowing Jesus should directly relate to knowing peace. And having no Jesus will probably mean no peace. It's a bit of a play on words right there. Know Jesus, K-N-O-W, know Jesus and you will know peace. If you have no Jesus, N-O, chances are that you will have no peace. I consider myself very, very fortunate having grown up in the household from which I come. My parents are two amazing people, simple but amazing. And they created for me and for my brother a very happy household. There was always lots of laughter and lots of love and lots of food and lots of security. My dad has got this thing going of always wanting us to feel safe, particularly my mom, because my mom is not always a confident person. Don't tell her I said that. And whenever I think of how I grew up, only happy memories come to mind. It was a wonderful household. And you know what I remember the most is a sense of very real safety. Because you are journeying with God, I want you to have that solid sense of safety deep within. For God has given you the guarantee that He will take care of you and that He does watch your life, your comings in and your goings out. In Psalm 4, we have it closed with this verse. So Psalm 3 is a morning prayer. The Israelites prayed it at morning services and so on. And Psalm 4 is an evening prayer. And it ends with these words. I will now go and lie down and rest. For you alone, O Lord, makes me dwell in safety. I want you to be able to sleep peacefully at night because your God is awake. And when you worry about tomorrow, I pray that you would make your heart receptive to the peace that can only come from Him. You will then soon find that the peace He gives surpasses human understanding. Hundreds of years before Jesus came, He was spoken of as the Prince of Peace. Isaiah 9, verse 6. Today we didn't focus on the political stuff and how he would one day turn every sword into a plowshare. But we did talk about how he could be our very own Prince of Peace here in our hearts, where it matters.